I'm Dave Lewis, and I'm a professor at Stanford University and a doctor at the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital. And I've been heading a research team looking at the cause of disease and the treatment of Schimke immunoosseous dysplasia, thanks to the support of the Cruisin' for a Cure Foundation. My background, well, I have been interested in the immune system from the very beginning of my medical training, and I initially was trying to understand why young children in general are vulnerable to certain kinds of infections that older children and adults are not. And I did some training in infectious disease clinically, but I've always been interested in the immune system, and my main specialty has been in a type of cell called the T cell that's involved in regulating many sorts of immune responses that protect you against infections with bacteria, viruses, parasites, you name it. And I got interested in taking care of children and adults with these inherited immune problems when I was in Seattle at the University of Washington. I moved to Stanford in 1997 and was asked to kind of set up a similar program to diagnose and treat patients with these rare genetic conditions. And as part of that, I had met Dr. Borkel, who was really a key doctor in the history of Schimke immunoosseous dysplasia. He actually identified the gene that causes the disease in the early 2000s, and we were already good friends and had already been working together on where I was sort of assigned by him to try and study what's wrong with the immune system. And he would send me samples from wherever he was at the time. Some of his training, he was in Canada at sick kids in Toronto, and then he moved to Texas and at Baylor, and the entire time we've been collaborating on this disease. And we actually first got some grant support on it in the early 2000s, and have published together for many years on it. And Dr. Borkel, was always intrigued, like even though we had identified the gene that's affected, we really didn't understand how it leads to the manifestations of the disease. And Schimke immunoosseous dysplasia is unique. There is no other genetic disease that has this particular combination of problems. And we see it worldwide, regardless of where you're from, your overall genetic background, race, sex. Everybody has the same set of medical problems. And this includes a problem with the T cells in their immune system. They all have some degree of kidney problems, usually requiring a kidney transplant. They all have problems with their blood vessels. Many of them have problems with migraine headaches, or things that are more related even to things like strokes, like transient ischemic attacks or actual strokes. They all are very, they are relatively short individuals because their cartilage involved in their bone growth is always affected. And so the big mystery has been, why is there this unique combination of problems that we really don't see in any other gene? So we now know, thanks to the work of Dr. Borkel, but particularly a lot of other people, many people have actually worked on the function of the gene that causes Schimke immunoosseous dysplasia. And the gene, Dr. Borkel gave it kind of a funny name, but we're stuck with it. It's called SMARCAL1, SMARCAL1. has a very long acronym that it stands for, but we don't need to get into that. But the SMARCL1 gene is very important for the protein that it encodes, has a very important role in making sure that cells, when they are getting ready to divide, that their DNA gets copied efficiently in preparation for that. So you need to double the amount of DNA. Every chromosome has to have a duplicate made of it in order for there to be cell division. So cell division, of course, happens all the time. Our bodies are constantly replacing cells. As part of growth, you need to increase the number of cells. So obviously this is a really important protein. There are literally, though, hundreds of other proteins that are also involved in DNA replication. And yet, when there's a genetic mutation of those, they have a very different type of diseases. And nobody has explained what it is about SMARCL1 deficiency that accounts for this particular pattern. So that is the big mystery of the disease. And so what we're really trying to take on in setting up a research program is to finally, I hope, explain how this one gene leads to these very diverse disease problems. And we have a working idea for that would be kind of difficult to explain in this interview, but I will be sending the Cruz and Ferry Care Foundation a very detailed explanation as to why we think that happens. And we think that until we really understand that, it will be hard to come up with a therapy that can be used for all children that have SIOD. We think that we can transplant many of these children with hematopoietic stem cells, kidney transplants, but not everybody's going to be able to get those treatments. And we want to come up with something that will be available to all children with the disease and that will help as much as possible all of these different disease manifestations. We can't transplant, for example, blood vessels to replace the blood vessels that have abnormal function SIOD. But if we can come up with drugs that will improve the function of the blood vessels, for example, that would be very helpful. And in the cases where maybe we can't do a hematopoietic stem cell transplant, we may be able to still improve the function of the blood cells using a drug therapy. So that's really kind of our big picture goal for the research.